So what's it like for you to be in Dubrovnik for the first time here in Croatia?
Warm. It's nice and pleasantly warm. I've been to Reboot in Split a couple years ago, and it feels bigger. I mean, it's still a similar crowd, but it feels like it's growing.
Over 1,500 people are here this year, the biggest ever, a lot of indie games. What are your thoughts about the growth of indie games around the world in places like Croatia and Europe?
I think, indie games, I think, are where you have a chance for the most personal kind of games. And so I always hope that an indie scene will have a stamp on it that's like what is a Croatian indie game? And sometimes when you come to an emerging market, you'll get a lot of games that are like, well, it's a lot like Angry Birds, but it's you get some of that. But I really like the games that are like, seem to come from a place that and they couldn't have come from any other place,
How have you seen, when you go to different parts of the world, the games you make influence what's happening elsewhere?
Oh man, it's hard. I'll just take credit for all of it. All the best games. I'm old enough now that people were like, I was conceived while my parents were playing your game, and that's not a true story. But like, there's a lot of stories about how I was really young when I played your game, and that's great because so if someone says I'm in the industry because I played your game, it's like I hope that's like great, right? Like you're liking it in the industry. But that's a lucky spot to be in because it just could be someone else's game, and I hope it had a positive influence. Try to be positive.
I mean, back in those early days, there was the whole garage thing going on, right? And now you have that resurgence thanks to all these new platforms, all these new crowdfunding. What are your thoughts about the role those types of things have opened up for small teams to create stuff and go direct to the consumer?
Yeah, I think things like crowdfunding and also I would say boutique publishers like Double Fine Presents, where you have an indie, more experienced indie helping out other indies, I think are a chance for games to be everything that people want them to be in a way. Like I think in the old days it was like games were controlled by a couple of gatekeepers who said, I think games this year will be about this, and they would take chances based on their own instincts, but still small people deciding what to do with a whole bunch of money. Now there's like more people deciding to do it with smaller amounts of money. So things like adventure games, which may not be as big as other genres, can still find their audience because those people will organize by some method to make that genre game happen. And you see things kind of self-organizing in a way, like things via, like I don't think in the old days. Here's another example: games television. Right, there was like games. There was G4 TV and trying to make games on TV a thing in the early days, and for some reason it never could compete with and yet now you have all these people watching Drake play Fortnite on Twitch, right? And that was just kind of, it just invented itself. It wasn't like, I don't think people said like in the future, like we're going to create this thing that is, I feel like the fans made it in a way. So anyway, that's all a long thing to say that fans are making games that for their individual tastes, and games can be all one of many, many, many different things now.
And in addition,
a lot of words.
In addition to Twitch, the other thing that wasn't necessarily around back then was eSports, at least the way we see eSports today. What opportunities do you see competitive gaming opening up for indies, as we have seen a lot of smaller companies come out with games, become eSports, and grow?
Yeah, I think I'd like to see the kind of breadth in eSports you see in a lot of games. And there's indie games like even Gang Beasts. Like Gang Beasts, if you've seen the crowds that gather around people playing that game, it's like it doesn't look like a typical esport game, but people can get really competitive with it. It's always surprising when people find a way to get competitive about these things. And so I think seeing a broader and broader variety of games for esports, I think is going to be a healthy thing.
How about the fact that a lot more people like to watch people play video games today than play video games themselves? How does that aspect impact game development today?
That's like a really interesting problem, to make a game that's fun to watch as it is to play. And to bring up Gang Beasts again, that is the secret of that game, is that it gathers a crowd and people watch it, and part of it is in the controls and how they feel, but the characters do these ridiculous things as a result of what you did, and you can cheer for it, and the surprises, and so and that gets into like whether they'll be successful in streaming. That game's been really successful with streamers, and I think it doesn't. I don't think it really corrupts game design. I don't think it's a negative thing for game design. It just makes you think about like, and how watchable will this be? I mean, for some people, games have always been watchable. Like some people always like to watch. I don't want to play the game. I don't like to, I just like to watch you play the game. You'd hear a lot, in your house, but I think it's a healthy thing to think about.
When it comes to your studio, can you talk a little about what's new when it comes to Psychonauts?
Specifically in relation to what you just asked, or just in general? It's even more challenging for the kind of content that I often do, which is like narrative-based, single-player, content. If you stream it, or if you're watching it, after you watch it, do you want to pick it up and play it again? And that is kind of a problem for that kind of content. And so, the solutions are either we just stop making that kind of content, or we find a way to make it that you still want to pick up the game after you've watched somebody else see it, and that's either that might have something to do with procedurally generated content or hats. No, I don't know. It's a hard problem. It is a hard problem.
When it comes to virtual reality, a few years back, everybody was on that bandwagon. We've started to see the technology evolve. What are your thoughts, having explored that technology, when you look ahead for VR?
I mean, we dipped our toe in the water with Psychonauts and Realms of Ruin, and we liked it. But I was never I've never been someone to say the future is going to be all VR all the time, because I myself don't necessarily want to strap that thing on my face all the time. But I have had some really powerful and cool experiences when I do. And I think as the hardware gets lighter and less obtrusive and more cordless and all those things and cheaper, it's going to get more and more interesting and financially viable to develop for. But it's fun that it's in this experimental phase where people don't really know what it is yet or what's going to be the killer thing that's going to make people go super nuts for it. But I like to we're still kind of waiting and seeing.
When it comes to mixed or augmented reality, do you have any opinions on the potential for that when it comes to yourself and game development?
Yes. I mean, in some ways I find augmented reality even a little cooler than VR, because you're still in the world, you're still participating in this world. They're very different, of course, but I have never, there'll be a new challenge to try and come up with a game that works in the world itself. And I never got super into Pokemon Go, but I know people who've just lost themselves into that world, if you're counting that as, as one of those experiences. Maybe someday.
The other thing we're seeing a lot of these days when it comes to trends is cryptocurrencies. It seems like more and more game companies are getting involved in this as well. What are your thoughts about cryptocurrencies as they relate to video games?
Well, I mean, I've seen it. I've only seen it so far in interesting things like marketplace plays, like Brian Fargo's platform that he's working on, I think is kind of interesting. And there's other things that involve ownership of digital content that I think could be turned into something useful like that. But I don't know about how it affects gameplay or anything like that. I don't have any ideas for that, but maybe someone smarter than me will, and then I'll just follow them along as usual.
What excites you about game development today?
I like that. Well, I like that it's harder to be original. When we made the first Psychonauts, we could be like, Black Velvet, hey, no one's done it before, that's great. And there's so many great indie games out now that have, we're going to make a level, it's all about crumpled paper, and then, tear away. There's just more of these games that have done really original, really creative things, and so you have to really think a lot harder and just weave through, and that's great. I think that's a really healthy thing for games. The games have, broadened out. They're not just high fantasy and science fiction like they were in the 90s. There were some games that weren't. Everyone's going to get mad but it seemed like there was a narrow focus of allowable subject matter that has just exploded, and people are doing games about anything, and that's great.
What's it like for you to be at an age now where you're winning Lifetime Achievement Awards?
Alarming, I think, for health reasons. I don't know. They must know something. To get 2 in a row, it must be a leak in my health records. I don't know. Or else they're just sick of my face. They're like, just give him this award. He'll shut up. Too bad, suckers. I'm not dead yet.